It is 2024 recruiting season, kind of, not really, but DJ Lagway is announcing his commitment decision in less than a week. So we got John Garcia here from Sports Illustrated to talk about DJ Lagway, Jake Merklinger, and Charles Lester III, only here on Locked On Gators.
You are Locked On Gators, your daily podcast on the Florida Gators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Joining me now for Locked On Gators is John Garcia, Sports Illustrated's Director of Football Recruiting, Locked On's Recruiting Insider, and I'd like to thank LinkedIn Jobs for being the official college football recruiting sponsor across the Locked On College Network. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. John, it's been a while since we last spoke, but
yes.
we are here now for 2024 talking about just that recruiting, and we'd be fools to not start with DJ Lagway, who is committing in less than a week now. How should Florida Gators fans feel about the potential of DJ Lagway committing to the Gators?
Yeah, look, let's remember, no locks in college football recruiting anymore. I don't know if there ever was, but there certainly aren't any now. And this stuff changes pretty quickly. Last week, we talked about, hey, keep an eye on this USC visit, right? When you're going up against Lincoln Riley for a quarterback, it's really the only position. If there's a quarterback involved with Lincoln Riley, watch out, because his resume is as good, and he's about to add to it. It's about as good as anyone's at that position. And we now already have an answer to the only unknown going into that process, right? Could that carry over to USC? Well, that's a resounding yes as far as 2022 is concerned. So we knew Lagway was going back out there, second visit to USC since picking up that scholarship offer. And sure enough, look, he saw this great game against Notre Dame. USC is positioning itself for the playoffs, led by a dual threat quarterback that presents a ton of issues for everyone in Caleb Williams. DJ projects the same way. Yes, he connected with Caleb on the trip. Of course, he spent time with Lincoln Riley on this trip. This is the clear top target for the Trojans, which again, it says a lot, right? It's USC. California's QB heaven, and they want to go into Willis, Texas for DJ Lagway, just like Florida wants to do. So this is an absolute contender in this race. They probably always were, but this is just confirmation. And like you said, with less than a week away from the decision, you got to feel USC in this conversation much more, maybe than we even anticipated ahead of that visit. That said, over the long-standing portion of his recruitment, we've been feeling Florida for DJ Lagway for some time, right? He called it's his dream school. That fit is phenomenal. Look, Anthony Richardson, we're starting to think is heading to the NFL. That will be an evaluation that is pumped up athletically and with that athletic profile, and that is a lot of similarities to how DJ is going to be presented as a college player in the next 2 years. So that fit makes a ton of sense as well. So it's not as David versus Goliath as maybe I made it seem to be. Florida's been at this longer for Lagway, and he's more familiar with Gainesville than LA. So that's important to mention as well. Now, here's the other part. Is it just these two teams? I think it is. I really think it's one coast versus the other. But he's teasing A&M, he's teasing Clemson, he is a Baylor legacy. All those schools will have hats on the table. And I think that'll be fascinating to track here, because a lot of schools are obviously keeping an eye on this commitment. He is the next big 2024 QB domino to fall, and that's going to affect the Jaden Davises of the world and everyone else who's uncommitted in that 24 cycle. I know we'll talk about another one in a minute. So this is a huge domino for everyone to track in DJ Lagway. So does he commit December 7th and wrap it up? It would be a huge day for whichever school it is. Again, it feels a little bit like the Caden Jones recruitment we talked about on the last show. We could be approaching coin flip status. I think over the long term, Florida's done the best job recruiting him. But in the short term, and with the optics and trend of visiting USC, they absolutely are going to factor into this thing. So you start to wonder, does DJ have his mind made up now, or is that process going to go all the way until the morning of December 7th. That could make things even more fascinating to consider. But yeah, Clemson's still in it, A&M, Baylor as well. But really, for me, this feels more like a Gators versus Trojans deal. And you can make the argument either way in DJ Lagway's case. So Florida fans need to feel optimistic, but not confident. Not like there's no way he goes somewhere else. But there's certainly a lot of confidence coming from that Florida Gator coaching staff here, despite the USC visit. But we're not going to take it lightly.
Yeah, Gators fans, just do what I always do. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst. That's the way to approach it. You mentioned, it's Florida, USC is kind of how it feels. I know other people feel that way as well, so it's East Coast versus West Coast. I'm taking Biggie over Tupac, which isn't even true, by the way. I like Tupac more, but, I have to do it for this point. But
lyrically and storytelling-wise, yes.
Yeah, and this is going to be a consistent discussion. You brought it up. It's going to be a consistent comparison. DJ Lagway, Anthony Richardson. We know that Lagway has the build. We know Lagway has the mobility, the legitimate dual threat capability. But what is DJ Lagway's, I don't want to say ceiling, but what do you think he will be at the Power 5 level? Because the big allure with Anthony Richardson was what he could become. So what are we looking at with DJ Lagway, where he'll have more than 1 year with Billy Napier should he choose to be a Florida Gator?
Yeah, I think that's where it gets really fascinating, because in looking at, again, to bring back USC into the conversation, it feels different in terms of what is placed upon the quarterback. At USC, it's like, if you don't go, we don't go, right? But at Florida, there's a running game. There's an offensive line. There's a balance that Florida can project him with that could maybe ease that development process, as opposed to if he's the guy year 1, year 2 at USC, it's all on him. It feels like, right? It feels like USC right now is all on Caleb Williams. So it's not the same at Florida, and I think that's a good thing. If you self scout, if you're DJ or any recruit, and you see the path to playing time that's still very clear, let's make that clear, because USC is going to have more talent at the top of their quarterback room, potentially, with Malachi Nelson coming in, Jaden Rashada coming in for Florida. It's going to be similar, right? 2 big-time California passers in the class ahead of you, regardless of which school you go to, but you present something totally different with both of them. So that development angle, I think, is advantageous to Florida in particular, because you're going to have a great running game on top of it. And obviously, look, it's the SEC, man. This is a different feel for a kid like this. And DJ likes that. I think he's a pressure seeker. I think that's all going to factor in well for him. So what he could be is eventually everything we thought AR could be. I think that's really the perfect way to look at it. You don't blame Richardson if he leaves. It's just the nature of the business element of this thing. But in terms of quarterback development, he needs time. I think every NFL team is going to say that. I think every college football evaluator will say the same thing. So DJ going through a situation similarly would make a lot of sense at Florida, as opposed to just being like, hey, here's the keys to the Ferrari, go get it. Good luck. We win or lose on you. I think he could have a little bit more time and space to grow at a school like Florida compared to USC, where it does feel like it's a little bit more, or a lot more, on the quarterback's shoulders exclusively. So I think Florida affords him a little bit more time. And obviously, look, Billy Napier has been able to do this over a long period of time with different styles and different philosophies. So as this roster comes a little bit closer to his own vision, I think that balance will become even more a part of the equation. Because I'm sure if you're negatively recruiting against Florida right now, you're like, well, they can run the ball, but what about this passing game? Super inconsistent, all this stuff. Those are the areas where in the next year or so, we're going to see Florida start to combat a little bit of that perception. So again, time, I think, is on DJ's side. If he picks Florida, at USC, it might not be the same case.
A quick word from BetOnline, because today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline, and the Florida Gators were 9.5-point underdogs against Florida State this past Friday, which means they covered. In every single game this season that the Florida Gators were underdogs, they cover the spread. Make some money for yourself with BetOnline. BetOnline is your number one source for all of your betting needs and sports information, whether it's football, basketball, baseball, soccer, hockey. tennis, soccer specifically, World Cup. Ooh, ooh, ooh. It's been beautiful. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn all about the trends and action. Check out BetOnline. It's where the game starts. Yeah, and I mean, we spoke about DJ Lagway. Now moving on to another quarterback in Jake Merklinger, who visited Florida early mid-November. I believe it was November 12th, if I'm not mistaken. Is it safe to assume that if DJ Lagway does commit to Florida, Merklinger is out of the question? Because I know that we've talked about, I feel like I asked you about every position by now where I'm like, oh, like, could you take multiple people? And of course, up until very recently, Florida had Jaden Rashada and Marcus Stokes, and
Right.
Miami had Jaden Rashada and Emory Williams. And we've seen two quarterbacks be in a class, but I feel like DJ Lagway and Jake Merklinger are both quarterbacks where you kind of think about them as the quarterback in their class. So is it safe to assume that if DJ is the Gators commit, then Merklinger won't be?
That is the expectation. I think especially this early, Brandon, I think that is where we should expect those dominoes to fall. If you're going to bring in two quarterbacks, you typically do so much later in the cycle, right? You mentioned Miami and Florida obviously did it later in the cycle. Alabama is another one that has two quarterbacks on board. They did it going into these guys' senior seasons. So if it were to happen this early, it would be a bigger surprise, right? Because that's a longer period of time that you have to sell these two on kind of being the co-leaders of the class. And frankly, no quarterback wants to hear that. So on the front end of this thing, yeah, it's one or the other, right? And that's a good thing. I think that's okay at this stage of the game because twofold here, and this current class is a perfect example as to how much things can change. The evaluations change, the priority levels change from both perspectives, right? Kid to school and school to kid. So you probably don't want to load up too much at any one position this early in the 24 cycle, even if you feel good about your evaluation of a certain prospect or group of prospects. So yeah, I'm looking at it that way. It's one or the other in this regard. And look, they're a little bit different, both athletic. Merklinger has 3-sport background to his name as well, plays lacrosse out in Georgia, much closer to home. I think Florida is one of the closest schools to him out of Savannah. So it's a very different recruitment in how both it plays optically and geographically, which is important because he's looking at kind of schools in that footprint as opposed to Lagway, who's literally looking coast to coast. So time is on your side in that recruitment, even more so than that of DJ Lagway, where you feel good about your effort, but there's still pressure there. I think otherwise for Merklinger, it's like, hey, it's going to be regional. It's going to be this small group of schools: Tennessee, Clemson, Georgia, Florida. It's going to be that group of schools, and that's kind of it. You don't envision it changing a whole lot. And he's not ready to make a decision either. So I think that works out even better for Florida because Lagway is going to come off the board in December, and Jake's probably more of a spring guy into next season when all this dust has settled. Because let's not just look at it from a 1-to-1 quarterback to quarterback ratio in the class of 24. The portal, we just talked about it. The portal is going to be a huge factor in not only who Florida maybe adds, who do they lose? Who else in this could this quarterback room be minus Anthony Richardson and ... Very possible. You almost expect that from every program at this point. So that part of it could really factor into how much Florida pushes for a quarterback like that, almost independent of what DJ does. So the timing, I think, works out really well for both of these quarterbacks because they're two of the best in the country.
Yeah, and that's actually what I wanted to ask about next. Is like, what kind of quarterback is Jake Merklinger? Because we've talked about DJ Lagway ad nauseum at this point. We've talked about 2023 quarterbacks incessantly, but we haven't really talked about Jake Merklinger in terms of his actual skill set. Is he the dual threat that we talk about with DJ Lagway? Is he just a pocket passer that's not very mobile? Who are we looking at with Jake Merklinger? Again, obviously, he's still young. He's still got developing to do, but just at this point.
Look, he's plenty mobile. He's not DJ. I don't want to sell him as, hey, you're getting the same skill set with either guy. I don't know how many runs you would design specifically for Jake to keep the ball on his own, but he can absolutely run the football. There are a lot of rushing samples on his tape. We mentioned earlier, three-sport guy, and he's big, 6'3", 195 or so. He's tough. You know, he can play in that system where you're at a minimum keeping a defense honest with the running ability of a quarterback. You're just not going to design like QB power and QB sweep and some of that stuff that we see some of these programs utilize. That said, look, as a passer, there's a lot to like with Jake. He can absolutely push it down the field. He's tough in the pocket. He'll step into a throw knowing he's going to get cracked. That's what you want. He's got that gamer in his own game. And look, it's pretty down the field. The trigger is quick, and he can push that thing 55, 60 yards. We've seen it on tape as a junior up in Savannah. So there's a lot of tangible production and third level value with Jake's game right now as he rounds out his technique going forward. You want to see a little bit more efficiency and underneath accuracy. Same thing we would say about DJ Lagway in that regard as well. So still room to go, but this foundation is really nice. He's a big, modern, tough, athletic quarterback that's going to be able to push it down the field. And that should be exactly what you look for if you're a Florida Gators fan, because that's really what we didn't see a whole lot of this year, at least in terms of the amount overall with this crew.
Yeah, and the last guy to talk about is on the defensive side of the ball, not a quarterback, but a cornerback now in Charles Lester III. And we'll touch on him a little bit. But one thing that I wanted to talk about him that intrigued me more was that right now Charles Lester III is listed as 6'1", 171 pounds. In evaluating a kid, whether you're doing it for, whether you just like evaluating people, whether you're doing it for media, whether you're doing it for a school specifically, what does that kind of do for an evaluation where you look at a kid who is a 2024 kid, who's a high school junior, and you go, okay, well, maybe he's going to be, 6'2", 6'3" by the time he even gets on campus. Does that kind of play into the evaluation at all, or is it more just like, hey, he's 6'1", that's what he is?
No, you should always project. I mean, I think that's the hardest part of the game, but it is an absolutely important part of the game, because you're talking about potentially the difference between a corner and a safety, or a DB and a wide receiver. Charles is very good on the offensive side of the ball. His ball skills are some of the best in the state of Florida right now as a junior, which is why he's so coveted. And that's, first of all, that's going to be a heavyweight battle, right? It's Georgia, it's Bama, it's FSU, it's Florida. I mean, it's going to be the regional powers in that recruitment for an in-state kid. So that'll be fascinating, almost a measuring stick type of recruit early to identify in that 24 class. If you're a Gators fan, hey, how back are we from a recruiting standpoint? Measure Charles Lester. That'll be one of the lightning rod recruits to look at in the next cycle. But yeah, 6'1", 175 with ball skills and a multiple position projection that feels okay. Today, you could say, hey, if he's going to be a safety, if he's going to be a receiver or a big boundary corner, you're good with all three of those if you're any of the coaching staffs that we just named. So he is a special athlete in that regard. So I think because of that, you just recruit him. It's like, don't worry about the position projection right now. Allow that to evolve as his body and skill set suggests, but you're not going to not take him because he gains a couple pounds or gets a little bit taller, right? So in that regard, you just take him. He's kind of like Jakeem Jackson, right? Similar profile athletically, where you're like, I don't know if he's a nickel or a corner or a safety, but either way, we want him in our secondary. I think that he's the same type of prospect, but maybe with a bigger athletic profile or a higher athletic profile on top of it. So I think he's fascinating, and he will be, again, a measuring stick recruit to look at for all the schools in the Sunshine State.
Yeah, as I say, I'm looking at his offer list right now.
Yeah.
This is insane. He's got Bama, Florida State, Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, Oklahoma, Florida, Georgia Tech, Kentucky, Miami, Michigan State, Notre Dame, Penn State. That kid is going to play high-level P5 football. Hopefully it's in Gainesville. We'll see. But thank you so much, John. This was John Garcia, Sports Illustrated's Director of Football Recruiting, Locked On's Recruiting Insider. Catch him all throughout the Locked On College Network, and catch him on Locked On Gators as often as we can possibly get him here.
Thanks for having me, Brandon.